One of the things I've always admired about you and your family, Justin, is your inclusion. It's never about one community or the other. It's about what does each community need.
This is something I learned from my mother. She made it very clear. You're Canadian first, and you if you're going to do anything for the community, you should be looking at Canada as a whole. And honestly, if it weren't for her, I might not see things the way I do. So I'm very thankful to her for that. Yeah.
Philanthropy doesn't always start with money, it often starts with showing up. I'm Donette Chan, and this is The Forefront Next Gen Generosity. Today, Justin Poy joins me to talk about community, culture, and what it means to give back using the skills you already have. Let's dive in. I feel as if I have known you and your family for a long, long time. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so I'm so happy that you're here this morning.
Well, thank you
Uh,
for
uh,
having me. Yeah.
yeah, and let's just say that um, you are a TMU graduate, creative school,
Yep.
as am I,
Mm.
and your parents, I believe, are honorary doctorates, honorary
That's
graduate
correct.
of the
That's
school,
correct. Yes,
and
that is correct.
that's huge for the university.
Mm.
And of course, the landmark uh, giving that they made to the Image Arts Center. I just wanted to go back to you.
Mm.
You and I have had many discussions about being Chinese.
Yes.
In the 70s, you talked about the fact that there were not too many Canadian Chinese around, and you did not necessarily want to stand out as Chinese. Tell us that story.
Well, it was a very different Canada, and certainly a very different Toronto. I remember, I grew up in North York, and if you wanted to have Chinese food, you literally had to go down to Spadina, and there was maybe one or two streets where you could get Chinese food. And in hindsight, we thought it was delicious, but in hindsight, those restaurants would not meet up by today's standards. But and it was something that we did as a family. My mother grew up in Hong Kong, and actually a lot of her friends who also graduated from the same school as her, ended up being in Canada and moving to Toronto. So we had family friends that were Chinese. She had grown up with some of them, and we got to become friends with their kids. But for example, the school I went to, um, I I didn't have any Chinese friends. There was one other Asian guy in my high school, and he was Korean, and they thought he was basically Chinese. And back then, didn't matter whether you were Chinese, Japanese, Korean. It was all just one. You were just Asian, and that was basically it, right? And so, as a child, there was a lot of racism, and actually, racism was allowed. If somebody during recess was calling you a racial slur at school, the teacher wasn't going to step in, because it wasn't they were being malicious. I mean, some of them were quite ignorant. They would be a little bit racist themselves. So when you are a child and you stand out that way, you don't want to stand out that way. I mean, you want to stand out, but not that way. And all of our heroes on television, well, there were no Asian ones. Bruce Lee, yeah, he was popular, but there were some shows like the Green Hornet that we would watch, but he was forced to wear a mask. And so the heroes that we grew up with, Starsky and Hutch and $6 Million Man, anytime we wanted to play those characters during recess, well, I never got to be any of those guys. So, and it was and they and my friends would argue with me and say, well, you don't even look like the guy. So so growing up, I really was very conscious of the fact that, maybe I don't want to be Chinese. I don't want that identity, and that lasted for a very long time until I actually got to TMU. And at the time of my graduation, my mother actually said to me, "You know what? It's really time that you volunteer in the community and get to know the community." And the first thing that she had me volunteer for was the Mon Sheong Foundation. And we sat on a committee together. It was a fundraiser called the Cathay Ball, which still exists today, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I felt a common bond with everybody. I made friends very easily, and it was at that point, that would have been the late mid to, yeah, mid-90s. I just said, "This is it." I was no longer feeling ashamed, and also at that time, there was a huge immigration coming from Hong Kong. It was historic, and I felt really good. I felt really good about the direction that, the country was going, and I've been that way ever since. So I haven't looked back. Yeah.
When your mom, Vivienne
Mm.
Poy, introduced you to community, you just took off. You just didn't
Yes.
stop. I mean, even recently, the horrible fire in Hong Kong,
Mm.
and you were calling to help organize a charity.
Yes.
How did take us through what went through your mind in that instance, and also generally when you're
Mm.
asked?
Yeah, so, well, I think it's changed a little bit. So, back in the '90s, just like what had sort of happened with the Jewish community, a lot of, boards and committees were not inviting people of Chinese descent. So what do? They just go and start their own charities. Yeah, they start their own groups. And it turned out that some of these groups ended up becoming quite influential. Like the Mon Sheong Foundation, the Yi Hong Foundation, and I realized that I probably would have, well, I mean, I'm a marketing guy. And I always try to look at what is the strongest value proposition. And I remember when I graduated from TMU, I did get sidetracked a bit. I thought maybe I was going to go into journalism, and because I had won some CBC Journalism Award while I was in the creative school, and I ended up working at CTV. But then I went back to marketing and advertising, and the first thing I said to myself was, I don't want. Why should I compete with everybody else when there is something special about me? I don't want to be doing small retail ads for stores and restaurants, forever. But if I take advantage of what I was born with and the culture and the community that I am in, I probably could open up some pretty big doors. And it's funny because every company I called to ask them if they would like to meet, I never got a no. I didn't necessarily always get their business, but I never got a no. So I remember I picked up the phone, and I love Jaguars. My whole life, I love Jaguars as a car. I picked up the phone, called Jaguar Canada, and I said, Mercedes and BMW, they're beating you when it comes to the Chinese. And
Mm.
and within less than 3 months, they became one of my first clients.
Wow.
And we were advertising for Jaguar, and then I was thinking, okay, what do immigrants need when they first come here? They need a bank, they probably need insurance, they need schools. So I called all the private schools and the bank, and I ended up building a decent portfolio based on the fact that I was in the Chinese community. I understood the mentality of the Hong Kong Chinese that were coming over, and I could help them to reach these people. And it didn't just stop there. I was able to do a lot of altruistic things as well. There was a company, a life insurance company called the Mutual Group. I think they eventually got bought out by Sun Life, but they had an organ donor program called By Mutual Consent, and they said, Justin, we have a lot of trouble getting people who are of Chinese descent to sign an organ donor card. And I said, "Well, I think I know some of the reasons why," and ended up, getting that piece of the business too. So I thought, this whole being Chinese thing is really working out, and and it has been great. It has really worked for me ever since, and even to this day, I will laugh with some of my clients. I have a client. I've actually had the same client ever since the mid '90s, the Canadian International Auto Show. And my contact there, he and I have become very good friends, and we laugh all the time because we now are their agency of record. But it all started because I was able to do some Chinese market promotions for them way back in the late '90s, and we still laugh about it today. Yeah.
When projects get bigger,
Mm.
generosity sometimes turns into long-term leadership, like joining boards or advisory roles. And I know you have been on some of these, but how do you decide when to step deeper into an organization's work? Because the person I know you as is that there's nothing halfway, and the energy that you bring to that is just remarkable.
Well, ho first of all, I've made the wrong decisions in the past. I have joined boards because a friend asked me. And then actually, I remember one. I won't mention any names, but she asked me to join the board, and I thought, "Oh, that'll be fun." I'll get to see her regularly. She and I went to high school together, and then she stepped down as chair like a year later. I said, "But why?" And I still have 3 more years, And I did not actually. It was a great charity, great cause, but it wasn't for me. I didn't particularly care for it. Like it wasn't something I could really get into, and I told myself I won't do that again. When I usually in the past, I would always join a committee if I enjoy it, and there was a board opening and they invite me, then I would join, and that's how I would choose. Um, these days, I don't have a lot of time for committee work, but I will join boards generally if it resonates with me. We all have, just like a company has a mission statement. Personally, we all have our own mission statements, and if it falls within that mission statement of what I believe in and what I want to put my time to, um, I will most likely, jump in deeper. You know how it is, Danette. Like once you start supporting an organization, if you really believe in it, you do want to give more. And it is hard to say no. Um, but also at the same time, I've been learning the art of knowing when the beginning and the end, because I would love to do a number of different things with a number of different causes and organizations, and you can only do you just can't keep piling it up, otherwise you just won't have any time, right?
I want to ask you about the difference between giving in, say, the Far East, let's say Hong Kong, China, and Canada. I mean, do you think what's the difference for our listeners here
Mm.
about how we give in those different areas?
So huge difference. Can in Canada, for those who have been here long enough or grow up here, we understand our social system. We understand, it doesn't matter how right wing you are and capitalist you are in Canada, you will still always be way far to the left compared to the Americans. We have a very strong social backbone here. And growing up here, you feel it. You know that you're prepared for it. I know there's a certain amount of tax I'm going to pay, and we understand how our healthcare system is funded. That there's things that the government doesn't pay for, so you must give. Otherwise, there's no capital improvements and things like that. And same thing with our universities and our schools. We get it, right? In Hong Kong, typically, and this is prior to 1997, when it was still a British colony, taxes were extremely low. I mean, they were so low, but that also means that nobody's looking after society. So most business people gave because they understood that if they don't, that a lot of people are going to fall through the cracks. So they grew up with a different mentality that nobody's looking after these people. I must give, and that's actually sort of where my grandfather, this is my mother's father, developed his sense of charity and giving. That if you do well in Hong Kong, that you look after the people of Hong Kong, and so that is a very Hong Kong thing.
When you look at the next generation of donors, creatives and community leaders, how would you encourage them to give back or to give forward?
Yeah.
And it's never, and as I always say, and you and I have talked about this, it's never about money only. In fact, money is probably one of the easiest things
Yeah.
to do.
Well, I get very discouraged actually when somebody just writes a check and, because it's kind of like, here's some money, go away. I much rather they engage in the conversation, and that they think about it with some sort of either medium or long term vision. Now, I mean, look, when we're trying to inspire others, just as when people are trying to inspire me, not everything is going to resonate. Um, but I try, before I approach others, I try to understand them, look at what they've been involved in the past, so that it's not coming out of left field. Because I think that we need to be, there's no shortage of good causes. Like there's tons, right? But we also, as individuals, can't save the world. I mean, I think we're much better off if individuals focus on something that they really want to focus on, and then you go to others to focus on other things. Um, and so I always, when I'm looking to inspire people to give, I'm always looking to make sure that I eh, I'm at least reasonably sure that they're aligned with the cause that I'm about to, bring about and educate them on. Um, but I mean, look, it's not easy. There are some causes which are much easier to raise funds for than others.
Or
And
sick,
it
as they
with that,
say there, my husband and I used to talk about that, and he would say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that cause is sexier than that."
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, that is the word. That's the word because look, sometimes stewardship, which is very important,
Yeah.
becomes a lot easier with some charities than others, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you do need to get creative with how you steward your donors, and you do want them to at least have an enjoyable experience because nobody wants to feel just like a bank machine, right? So you want to, and I always encourage whatever charity I'm working with to make people feel at least that they're a part of that community. So I remember at SickKids, um, we used to always, oh my gosh, this is another really weird tie-in. I remember I proactively called SickKids and says, I'd like to help you guys out. And I think I can get more donors and whatnot from the Chinese community. And this woman comes on the phone. Her name was oh god, I can't remember her name now, but she ended up it turned out she was the wife of my professor. Oh, Bonnie Good, and she was the wife of Jerry Good, who was my professor at RTA. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a really small world. So that was actually my first foray to Sick Kids. So I ended up, working with them to help them expand to the Chinese market. And then I did that for a few years, and then it stopped, and then I think a number of presidents had happened, and then I joined the board probably over a decade later. But one example was back then, even back then, I said to Bonnie, I said, we need to get people interested. So I need to make them feel like they're involved. I can't just go to them and say, sick kids, you want to give. So we actually organized a schedule of breakfasts where we had every time we had a researcher come and speak to them, and I tried my best to get researchers who were of Chinese or at least Asian descent. And back then, there was a doctor. He's now in Hong Kong, but he was um, uh, Dr. Lapsi Chui, who is had won multiple awards. I believe he identified and isolated the gene for cystic fibrosis while he was at Sick Kids, and he was sort of a superstar in the Chinese community. So I used to get him to come out, and he would speak at breakfast. And one thing I noticed is when you did that, you you made people feel like, okay, you're including me in this discussion, you're including me in the community. And I would, do those a couple of times, and I wouldn't ask them for anything until a couple of breakfasts later. And by that time, they really felt like they were invested in it. Like, you've taught me something. I care about this. Because it's very hard to give when you don't know much about something or you don't care about something.
One of the things I've always admired about you and your family, Justin, is your inclusion.
Hmm.
The inclusion, it's never about one community or the other. It's about what does each community need, what what is my bandwidth, for those communities, So I just wanted to say that thank you and your family for the way you have included, or the way you have sort of not stuck to just the one community that you
Mm,
are. In fact, I you know, when asked about the Chinese community and what is the gateway into the Chinese community, and I said the guy is Justin Poy, and we've talked about this, and I want to say that you know that it is somehow you are not just of the Chinese community, but you can connect all those dots, whether it be in the arts with the
yeah.
filmmaking or in healthcare. Okay. Um, yeah, I just wanted
Well,
to
I appreciate that you say that. I've always um, felt that, well, being born in Canada actually gives you an interesting and unique advantage when you're born in Canada, but you are culturally of a different heritage. You end up with this very interesting combination where you can't just, if I was an immigrant from China or Hong Kong during, my formative years, I might only be, involved in the, mostly in the Chinese community. This is something I learned from my mother. She made it very clear, you're Canadian first, and if you're going to do anything for the community, you should be looking at Canada as a whole. And honestly, if it weren't for her, I might not see things the way I do. So I'm very thankful to her for that. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? I mean, I want to ask you something like, how do you um, how do you get your own children to give back?
Mm. Well, that's going to lead in, because if it was an open ended question, the first thing I was going to say is I want to make sure that the culture of giving continues to the next generation. And so you asked me about my own kids. Now, you know, you can learn something from your parents, but the environment matters as well, the circumstances in which you're growing up. So for example, um, I my parents were immigrants, and I'm sort of the first Canadian generation, but I saw very closely what it was like to be an immigrant for them. So I cared a lot about these community causes. The next generation, I've noticed it, they don't care as much because they're like, "Well, I was born here, you were born here, dad, and, I'm just like every other Canadian." And so where I've heard from the community-based charities that really counted on people's cultural pride and whatnot, a lot of them are having tough time. They're having a tough time because the next generation are not giving. Um, but the thing is, kids these days are very different. Um, well, the financial situation is quite different for a lot of kids, right? How they earn money, how they project their future. It used to be you graduate, you get a good job in a big company, and you say, oh, okay, you can pretty much predict your life, right? Now it's very unpredictable. This whole gig economy has made people piece incomes together, so they're not thinking as long term. Um, and also, in the same sense that crowdsource funding has become a thing, where instead of getting a small number of investors giving a lot, you get a small amount from a ton of people. Donations and giving seem to be going that way too. That might also be because realistically, young people don't have a lot to give right now. But um, I think that how we can inspire is it starts a lot of time before people have any money to give. They start as volunteers. And my own children, they love to volunteer. They always look for things to volunteer. They're both out in BC now, and they volunteer for the Chinese Canadian Museum, and so it's kind of a combination of their heritage and whatnot. So I'm very happy about that, but it is a challenge. for the longest time, I remember all through my 30s and even my 20s, I was always the youngest person sitting in these committees and on these boards. And I always thought, why are all these people not inviting their children, to start a youth committee or something? And I don't know if it wasn't apparent to them, but I'm quite disappointed by that. The other disappointment that I have then is that, we know our population, we know that there are a lot of successful people, but we always see the same names coming up.
Yeah.
And that just still bothers me. And I don't know how to
Fatigue.
change it. Yeah, I don't know how to change it because there's a larger pool out there. I
Yeah.
just don't know how to help grow that pool. And because yes, there's a lot of the same names keep cropping up and popping up. And but I'm always hopeful. I think that we just have to keep doing our thing. Charity and philanthropy will always be part of the Canadian fabric. We have too many institutions that count on it, so it will always be part of our fabric. Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Donette. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching The Forefront, Next Gen Generosity. I am your host, Donette Chinloy Chan. You can also be part of the next generation of giving and community impact. Learn how you can make a difference by visiting torontomu.ca/giving. This podcast was produced by Jasmine Coleman and edited by Matt Weeks. Amanda Cupido is the executive producer. Thanks also to the team from the university, Hawaii Fadal, Meredith Jordan, Rivi Frankel, and Krishan Mehta.